Thank you all for being here. So this is a little bit misleading because there really should be a question mark on it, because I've asked you all to come to help me solve a problem and to understand this question of what's going on in the world. And what do we, those of us who care about education, those of us who care about the future of education, what do we think we need to do to prepare people, prepare students, prepare our institutions to thrive as individuals and to thrive as a society? So this sounds very formal, the introduction is very formal. I'm gonna call on you, I'm gonna pick on you, I'm gonna call on my good friend Mukesh Prasad there, who I worked with for a few years and used to bother him at the World Bank, and I get the chance to do it again. Pyle, our former alumni leader here. So I really want your help, particularly because I want to better understand this country. Even just following the news about what's going on here in India this week in the educational sector. Lots of noise. I think even people had trouble even getting here this evening because of student protests. So this looks formal, I'm here with Mike, but I really want you to disagree with me, to challenge me, and to help think through what it says here, how a global university must adapt in order to advance its mission. Really want your ideas on that. So it's a real pleasure for me to join you here at the center and to welcome you here. If this is your first visit here, I hope it's the first of many. If you're a regular visitor, I'm glad to see you back, and hopefully this is a place that you can feel like you're part of a continuous conversation, a place of inquiry and exploration with the university. I want to bring greetings from the faculty director, Gary Tubb, who 3 weeks ago, in the middle of January, was appointed as the first Anupama and Guru Ramakrishnan Professor in Sanskrit Studies at the University of Chicago. We're very proud of Gary for that new acknowledgement, and very pleased with that award, which will deepen our research and study in Sanskrit, which was one of the very first courses taught at the University of Chicago when it was founded 125 years ago. Our connection to South Asia and to India goes back to the very founding. And this year, in a few months, we will also celebrate the 50th anniversary of our South Asian Languages and Civilizations Department. So there are a lot of events happening in Chicago. In fact, March in Chicago and March here at the Delhi Center will be very, very active for the university. So you see the logo here, our little shield for the university. That's not just any old bird. That's the phoenix. Anyone know what the phoenix stands for? Rebirth. Exactly. So it's a mythological creature that lived for 500 or 600 years, then burnt up in crisis, and then was reborn out of that crisis. And I think can be a fitting symbol to kick off this conversation about education. Rebirth, renewal, regeneration, during what I'm calling a time of global disruption. Now, by global disruption, I'm going to get into a little bit. Disruption has lots of meanings out there. There's the disruptive innovation that Clayton Christensen talks about. I'm using it very broadly. When incumbents and existing parties their mode of doing business is threatened by either new processes, new players, but there's some fundamental disruption in their ability to continue business as usual. And what I want to discover and explore with you is, what is the rebirth out of this period in this sphere of education? And I've been exploring this question for the 2.5 years I've been at the university. I think it's important for all global universities now to think about what does it mean to operate in this new environment. But the issue actually feels more urgent and pressing to me now. And maybe you feel the same way. I think it feels to me that we are in a moment of heightened global anxiety and instability. Part of this, of course, is driven by global economic uncertainty. I think the slowing growth in China, low oil prices. The World Bank's Global Economic Prospects talks about substantial downside risks. We have challenges across the emerging markets. India is the best performing BRIC right now, although many of the Indians I speak to don't feel the same kind of confidence and optimism that they experienced when Mr. Prasad and I were here, when was it, 2011? Very different mood, even though India is still doing the best. I also detect a new sense of security vulnerability. The bizarre combination of what feel like Cold War tensions, what feel like World War tensions, what feel like new terror threats, whether it's ISIS and stateless actors, whether it's the Russia-US tension, whether it's the Syrian civil war and migration concerns across Europe. It's also a very interesting political moment, at least in the United States, for those of you who are watching. It's a time when it seems like our mainstream parties have in some sense lost control of their candidates. And I don't mean to judge it, but it's actually an interesting moment when there's a sense of anger, unrest, dis-ease, scapegoating, and very real concerns about inequality. There's real anti-establishment feeling now. And then, of course, within universities, very serious concerns about the cost of higher education, and proposals in the US to tie federal student loans to a university's proof that it can actually get its graduates jobs. Real debates about the role of freedom of speech on US campuses as well as here in India. And what is the relationship between freedom of speech and sensitivity to marginalized populations on the campus? Real questions about identity and inclusion, both for students at economic levels as well as for women. Recent issues related to sexual misconduct that are very serious. So it's a moment of, I think, real uncertainty and a real question about what is the role of the university and how are universities adapting. But taking a step back from this particular moment, I want to look at some of the broad trends that have been building for several decades and see where they lead to. And look at technology, globalization, or the global interconnection, integration of markets, and demography, the demographic shifts we're experiencing. And see how technology, globalization, demographics are creating new challenges and opportunities for higher education institutions. And I think they will inform three questions for us that are important. The first is, who are the students? How do we think about the student population and who we want to be teaching? The second is, what is it that they expect to be learning and or need to be learning? And third, how best to prepare them with that capacity, with those abilities. So the most profound trend, I think, is technology. The revolution in computation and processing power, revolution in communication and connectivity, the power of sensors and data. The radical increase in speed, power, choice for information, which of course is beyond just communication and computation, is now fueling lots of changes in transportation, manufacturing, like 3D printing, the life sciences, new materials. Raise your hand if you don't have a smartphone. Wow. And actually, we should remember that half the world doesn't even have a phone. And those that do have phones, many of them are not even smart. But this is a piece of science fiction, right? I mean, just think about the what do I want to get immediately at my fingertips? The weather? Do I want to order a gift from my colleague Sybil, who joined from Chicago? The ability to get on-demand access to information, to services. Science fiction a few years ago. Portability. We can take this anywhere. Through wireless and remote communication, all of a sudden, everything's portable. If you have a cell phone, let me know. If you've taken a picture with your phone in the past 10 days, raise your hand. If you've taken a picture with a camera in the past 10 days, raise your hand. Okay, it's actually a pretty good group. But, you know, disruption, new technology replacing the old. Personalization of services. We all expect or now rely on the fact that Google knows something about what we looked for the other day online. And or Amazon is recommending books for us to buy based on other things we bought. Use of personal data and personalization. New levels of interaction. If you've been on, WhatsApp or Facebook or some sort of social connection, raise your hand. These are all new capabilities that are very recent. Unbundling of services. You can now pick and choose the specific things you want. I was talking with Bada here, for example, I guess cable's still relatively cheap, so people buy the full cable service if they want, for TV. But, cable is dying in other parts of the world because people will just pick and choose what they want, either through Amazon or through Netflix. The unbundling of service. These are all new features, I think, that technology brings at our fingertips, and we're going to talk about what these should or could or will mean for education. And I think we're probably at the very early stages of this technological revolution with new breakthroughs in artificial intelligence, robotics, self-driving vehicles, 3D printing, nanotechnology, quantum computing. And of course, any one of these developments will have dramatic impacts across the economy and society and employment. Think about the traditional retail shop being disrupted by Amazon or Alibaba, which offer the on-demand access. And in some cases, I'm not sure they do this here, but you can get delivery in 1 hour in parts of New York. Do they have hourly delivery here in India yet? That seems like a very dangerous thing to promise. But it will come once drone delivery starts. How about traditional advertising? Disrupted by Google, capable of micro-targeting people who have a U Chicago affiliation and care about certain things. You can suddenly get Google ads delivered straight to you. Changing the nature of advertising and the return on the advertising dollar. Or Uber, or Ola, I guess, is the competitor to Uber here, in which the taxi ride experience is now ordered, paid for, tracked on your phone. And the ownership of assets is now distributed and controlled according to a common platform. Not a big deal here, but Airbnb. All right, in the US, everyone familiar with Airbnb, which is basically, it's like Uber, but your apartment or your house or your vacation home. I guess Indians are not always keen on letting others use their properties, but there are many people who earn a living using Airbnb in parts of New York. And Airbnb now provides almost as much rooms as some of the largest hotel operators around the world, changing the nature of hoteling. Traditional lodging is disrupted. Now, disruption is not new, and this trend of new technologies threatening the viability of their predecessors is, I think, the story of economic growth throughout history. And the horse was disrupted by the car, at least when it became cheap enough when the Model T came around. Fax machines. Who has a fax machine still? Disrupted by, really, we do? Or you personally do? We do here. You're one of the few. But, disrupted by email and scanning devices. The typewriter, who has a typewriter? Print newspapers. I still get one every day in my hotel room. Of course, I usually read the paper by then, online. Encyclopedia Britannica. Natural path of technological development. But things do appear a bit different now. The pace, the scale, and breadth of changes is greater than in past cycles. A recent article by McKinsey pointed out that it took more than 50 years after the telephone was invented until half American homes had one. 50 years. Yet the iPhone was introduced in 2007, much faster. It took radio 38 years to get 50 million listeners, whereas Facebook attracted 6 million users in its first year, and 600 million over the next 5 years. So the rate at which new technologies are being adopted has increased, and the speed at which industries are impacted is astounding. So if you're a shopkeeper or a taxi driver or a hotel manager, your business and your livelihood are increasingly threatened by just these new technologies, and many more are coming every day. And whole business models are changing. As one blogger put it, And I'm not sure, citing this blogger, I'm not sure every piece of this is completely accurate, but you get the point. Uber, the world's largest taxi company, owns no vehicles. Facebook, the world's most popular media owner, creates no content. Alibaba, the most valuable retailer, has no inventory. Airbnb, the world's largest accommodation provider, owns no real estate. Something very interesting is happening. Now, that doesn't mean that the disrupting companies will necessarily succeed. I think many will fail. Or that the old models will necessarily cease to exist. But there's a fundamental change about business models and their prospects. And that's just technology. Let's talk about globalization and the interconnection of markets. And I describe this global interconnection. Globalization is a politically charged word, so I'm a little careful with it because it means a lot to different people. But I'm talking about the interconnection, the increasing interconnection and integration of people across borders, processes, organizations, markets, systems, culture, and ideas across the world. So we can call it globalization for short. And this, of course, has transformed the way business operates in nearly every sector. The supply of inputs, whether it's intellectual inputs or material inputs or raw materials, they come from a greater number of sources around the world and a greater number of countries than ever before. Business processes involve participation and activities by more entities in more parts of the globe. Ideas and people traverse the globe with greater speed and volume, and borders and boundaries are less and less relevant. Borders and boundaries also offer less protection from competition, from information, from other ideas, from notions of identity increasingly, which is why you see some countries increasingly wanting to direct their education systems to actually teach certain identities because they're fearful even of their citizens who may be living and studying in other countries. They want to control that information. The third trend, demographics. Population and income are increasing like they always have. But of course, the growth of population is most pronounced across the global south. Population growth is expected to be most rapid in the 49 poorest countries of the world, which will double in size over the next 35 years. While, of course, many other parts of the wealthier world see a decline in their population and a decline in their birth rates. India's population is expected to increase by about, making it larger than the US and China combined. By the same year, 2050, 1 out of every 3 people under the age of 25 will be in Africa. Nigeria's population will surpass that of the United States. If you look at the chart of birth rates, you actually see Nigeria's, India does start to level off at some point, Nigeria's keeps growing. And more of these people in the global south will live in cities, earning more with the growing middle class, spending more, consuming more, demanding more, seeking more jobs, healthcare, consumer goods, financial products, and of course, education. So these are our long-term trends that I think affect these 3 questions I mentioned earlier. Who we want to think about as the students for education, what they need to learn in order to participate fully and enjoy meaningful and rewarding lives, and how they will demand to be educated. These trends are also changing the nature of academic research in many disciplines, but I'll focus on education, then we can talk about research if you want in the questions. So the first issue is who we think of as students. And I think that notion of students needs to stretch in a few dimensions. The first is geography. Now, there was a time, at least in the US, and I'll be interested to hear what people think about India, but you actually could be in the US a good regional university, attracting students from your regional area because they were going to live in that same area and they were going to become the professionals of that area, and that you could still be competitive that way. At this point in time, it's almost impossible to be a regional university in the United States. You have to be at least a national university, and increasingly, among the top schools, all global, seeking a global student body. So if we're thinking about going from the regional to the global, I think we also need to think about where are the parts of the world that have not actually gotten educational services, or have woefully few of them. And frankly, here in India, The demand for new educational services is tremendous. Too many people are simply not thought of, too many places are not thought about as places where educational investments are prioritized or valued. And access to higher education is extremely limited globally. So, I'm going to paint hopefully a good story about what we think Chicago is doing, and look at this fantastic center we have here. And the education we provide, we believe, is first rate. And yet it's affecting a very slim number of people around the world. As we think about these trends of technology and globalization and demography, we need to think about how geographically we need to expand our thinking. New markets and, of course, developing countries. Potential scholars, potential leaders are born every minute in every corner of the globe, but yet most of them are neglected and don't have the opportunities that we try to provide for our students and we try to be part of here in India. Human genius doesn't know any borders, and yet our institutions and our investments often do. Talent is global, and we need to think about how we want to tap that to solve many of our problems. Now, this change in thinking globally can be observed in at least many of the top US universities now. We are actively trying to diversify our populations and reach out to an international student population. And we see other countries are also doing the same. You go to Japan and you see them actively recruiting students from India. You go to their new programs in China trying to get students from the US. So we're all, at least at the elite level, trying to think about how do we globalize our student populations. In some cases, it's because we want the revenue of the tuition. For many schools, it's not Chicago's model, but for many schools it is a tuition thing. But in other places, they realize that if we want top talent, we need to look broadly for it. The second way, so geography is one way we need to expand. Another is age. Thinking about students must extend beyond just the traditional college age, because the pace of these changes mean that job requirements and entrepreneurial opportunities will revise rapidly and many times through someone's life. The idea of, okay, in 4 years you're going to learn everything you need to know for the 11 careers you're going to have over the next 50 years of working is increasingly an obsolete idea. So we need to think about what are the different ways we're going to expand our notion of students for people at other points in their careers, evolving their skills at different parts of their career. We at the U Chicago, the Graham School, is actively looking at ways to develop lifelong learning opportunities, focusing first on our alumni. But just because you've graduated from the university doesn't mean you're done learning or you're done with an interest in learning. How do we maintain that lifelong relationship? The third way I think our notion of who is a student needs to evolve is, in addition to geography and age, is economics. Outreach to lower income students or marginalized populations, new forms of financial aid, reducing barriers to entry for students, finding cheaper delivery models of education to lower income students. We're doing this in the US, and Chicago has launched a number of new initiatives to reduce the cost of education, to reduce the barriers to applying. We have a No Barriers initiative to make it really easy not to get in academically, but to afford to go to the university. Doing that domestically. And we also offer financial aid to international students, though not at quite the same levels of generosity. But it's a real question of how do we expand our notion of who is a student to get some of the urbanizing, growing populations across the world. And the last issue is gender and ethnicity. How do we make sure we're, and I think particularly acute in this country, not leaving out segments of the population? So the notion of students we need to think about differently and think how we use these trends to evolve that. The second question is what do we expect these students to learn? So I must confess that, and I'd love someone to counter this argument for me, but this emphasis in India on job skilling, the idea that we can identify the particular skills that someone is going to need, maybe for their first job we do, but long term. I think it's a fascinating experiment in trying to predict industry development. My hypothesis is that students need to be prepared for a world that they cannot predict and that we cannot predict, because the jobs we want to prepare them for may disappear. If we prepare them to be taxi drivers, for example, and we have automated Ubers driving around, they're not going to have jobs. If we prepare them to work in video stores, Netflix is going to displace them. So we need to think about preparing them from a world we cannot predict, because we don't know what the leading industries will be. We don't know which leading countries will be, what the leading currencies will be. We're in a volatile moment now. I mean, I'd like to make certain predictions as a proud American about some of those things, but I'm not sure that's based on facts or evidence. And the students will likely face a world of continuous change, where the status quo exhibits a permanent instability. So this suggests that the skills they need will be a different set of skills, the skills of problem solving, skills of learning, how do they keep learning, skills of being adaptive and adaptability, skills of resilience, because they might lose many jobs in their careers. And I also think they need the skills of originality and creativity. They need to learn how to think, because established industries will be upended more and more frequently. So more of them will need to be entrepreneurial and find their own ways of making money and surviving. And of course, what we used to teach was knowledge and information. I got the smartest thing in the room here. Knows more knowledge than anyone in this room, or at least can access it just as fast. So the idea of training people with knowledge, again, increasingly outdated. Instead, they'll need the capacity to synthesize absurd amounts of data and absurd amounts of knowledge and information and apply it to things, and how to use that data, how to analyze it and interpret it. So I do think people will need greater computation skills and comfort with overwhelming quantities of data in a way that previous generations never had to deal with. I think new generations of students will be well served with a global perspective, with an understanding of computer science and technology, so they're comfortable with it, with the ability to cross traditional disciplines. Training people just within a certain field of the sciences or the arts is probably not going to prepare them for the level of volatility they will face. One of the faculty members on the steering committee for the center in Delhi, you may know Martha Nussbaum, professor at the law school and in philosophy and several other departments, an eminent scholar. She talks about the need to create and educate complete citizens who can think for themselves, criticize tradition, and understand the significance of another person's sufferings and achievements. Because in this new period, demand for leadership and empathy will also be great. Those are some of the skills. What are some of the personal capacities people will need to have? I think people will need a level of mental health resourcefulness to not merely survive, but be capable of thriving during turmoil. I've mentioned resilience, mobility. People may need to be comfortable going to new places where there is opportunity, because some of the places that are filled with jobs now may not be the same places filled with jobs 5, 10, 20 years from now. People also need skills of self-mastery and discipline in a world with greater diversity of civilizations and populations clashing. Cultural intelligence, the ability to work productively with diverse groups of people. Now, maybe these are elitist notions, the idea that we can spend the resources to train everybody in the world with this set of problem solving. And maybe the answer is, in a place like India, actually, no, we got to get people who can do the basic sets of skills because the employment challenge is so great, the population is so big. I mean, we care about employment too. I think employable skills and employability is a critical issue in the US as well. But I believe that successful students, long-term, wherever they are in the world, will need more of that. And I'm not sure our traditional curriculums know how to deal with that at US institutions or Indian institutions. So I think it may be time to start rethinking some of our curriculums. Which takes me to the third question about how these trends affect education, and that is, how do we teach? how do we use some of these tools that we now have, and how do we take advantage of these challenges now to think about teaching differently? Right, if we go to the idea of the Amazon or Airbnb and Uber, what do they suggest might be possible in how we educate people? Right, I would think that education should be more accessible than it often is, and there may be ways to make it more accessible, maybe ways to make it available on demand, like we can for videos and the gift for Sybil, make it more portable so it can go places wherever we are, wherever our jobs may take us, wherever our lives may take us, wherever our child care responsibilities might take us. I think it probably also needs to be continuous over our lifetime and have enough of our personal information so it can track what we've learned over time. Clearly needs to be more global, I believe, both in terms of the content of what we're learning, but also the experiences we have so that we can keep people operating in different environments. If we think of the Uber, Airbnb, I think it also needs to be more networked across different sets of assets, right? Because increasingly we have, no institution is going to have everything a student may need or want. So perhaps people need to be able to access a whole network of different laboratories. Think of interlibrary alone, the traditional network of resources a university might have. You might need additional ways of deepening these networks. I think our education needs to be more data and measurement driven, because these are, very expensive investments. Are we getting the return on the investment? If we want to open it up to huge swaths of the global population, how do we do it in a way that is cost effective? More interdisciplinary and problem focused. And I think institutions need to be more capable of being flexible and changing more quickly. Now at the University of Chicago, we are very proud of how we educate our students, and we focus very much on teaching people how to think. How many people in this room are graduates of the University of Chicago? The rest of you, there's still time. If you'd like to enroll, we'd love to encourage you to think about the university. But we educate a small number of students. How might our approaches, which I'll detail a little bit, how is it possible to scale them up? If we think it's very important to teach people how to think, we do it in a fairly rigorous, intense, small-scale way. Can that be scaled up using some of these new technologies, using new partnerships, using new ways of doing business? To answer that question, it might be useful to look at what we're doing, but also what some others are doing in the education innovation space. So for our Teach People to Think, we emphasize, at least in the college, a core curriculum. Some core materials which students get to know very intimately in close proximity with a faculty member, a senior faculty member, and it's very much of an intimate relationship. Small classes, highly paid faculty, hard to scale that, but an important part of learning how to think. We offer study abroad opportunities so students can spend time in other countries, and about half of our students do at some point during their college careers. For the grad students, half our grad students are international at many of our schools. And what does it mean to be international? They have different passports, which is a very limited definition of their internationality. But we do have an increasing international student population, so more and more often the proportion of our students that are American citizens who grew up in America is a smaller proportion. At the graduate level, we have intense faculty workshops. It's a very personal, close, physical relationship oftentimes, physical in the sense of in the same classroom, in the same room. So scaling that up is a challenge. We also have, where you are today, these global centers that are intended to not do all of that interaction, all of that inquiry and debate and dialogue in Hyde Park, Chicago, but to create other major cities around the world. So we have it here, in Beijing, in Hong Kong, in Paris, to have more of that dialogue and debate with others and take some of that education and scholarly collaboration elsewhere. We also use these centers as hubs to find new ways of experimenting. So we have a program here called the International Innovation Corps, where we take recent college graduates from the University of Chicago and recent college graduates from Indian institutions. And they will partner on teams and work with different Indian government agencies on solving policy problems. Again, a continuation of their education, but also a way to have more impact in the world. We also use our center to host our Energy Policy Institute, which is working with the Delhi city government on an urban challenge to find solutions for India's air quality issues, as well as other Indian state governments on environmental regulations. We have students who, this is a hub for their work down at the Tata Institute for Social Science. So this is one way that we're trying to innovate to deal with some of these trends of globalization and the demographics. But there's some other very interesting models out there that other institutions. Who here has heard of Coursera? This is the company that made MOOCs, massively open online courses, popular. MOOCs, I think people thought, oh, they're going to take over the world. They haven't taken over the world. They haven't really threatened the major institutions. But the point may not be whether they, cause stress or threaten the existing universities. The question is, are they able to actually bring more people into educational opportunity? Right? So many governments around the world are using MOOCs to train their officials. Still small numbers, but in Saudi Arabia, other parts of the Middle East, they're using MOOCs as a way to give more affordable education to their people. Coursera partners with universities, they develop content, and they make most of them free. Originally, they were all going to be free, and now they're realizing that if people pay a little bit for a course, they're more likely to actually finish it. But the question is not necessarily whether people finish, now are they getting some educational benefits? So here's one innovation, the MOOCs, to get content broadly. And I think has been some innovation in how they work. I think the early generation of online classes were basically recording live classes that, without much interactivity, without much personalization, without much customization, without using the technologies to the fullest, but you're seeing more and more of that innovation happening now and improvements in quality. So I think this is actually the beginning of an important trend, and figuring out how to use this more effectively, again, to attract new definitions of who is a student who may not be able to come to a classroom in Hyde Park or even here in Delhi. Another really interesting innovation is a company called Minerva. Anyone hear of Minerva? It's a San Francisco-based company that decided, we don't need a campus. A campus is a very expensive investment, all those buildings and libraries. Why would we invest in a campus? Let's actually create residential halls in 7 cities around the world where students will rotate across these different cities. And you know what? Let's while we're getting rid of the campus, let's get rid of lectures too. Because the students can still watch the lectures, but what they really want to educate them in is let's flip the classroom around. You have a flipped classroom? So you watch the lecture at home when you can be brushing your teeth, eating dinner, whatever, because that's the passive activity. And then when you come in, you work with the professor on the actual learning, and that's where you do the problem sets and much more interactive. And a lot of that is also done online, in online seminars of no more than 19 people, where the students are, they're getting an interactive digital experience while they're in one of 7 cities around the world. And the Minerva idea is, it's not about knowledge and content, it's about skills and habits of mind and teaching people how to think, because those are the skills they're really going to need. And for the basic introductory material, use MOOCs for those. Another interesting model, again, they're not trying to be a mass education provider the way Coursera promised to be. They want to be like Harvard or the University of Chicago. They want to be able to attract that elite core of students. But again, a new model for accessing more parts of the world. The third example I want to give is an organization that just won the Fast Company, it was just on the Fast Company magazine list of the third most innovative company, or the top 3 innovative companies in Africa, the African Leadership Academy. So if Minerva is creating a new university, ALU is trying to create a whole new university system in sub-Saharan Africa, actually in continental Africa. And they're planning to build 25 campuses that will house 10,000 students each over the next decade or 2. Pan-African university campuses, emphasizing leadership and problem solving. And their thought is, we're not going to invest in scholars and researchers and laboratories for the most part. We're going to curate the best content wherever we can get it. So by this course from the University of Chicago, will buy this course or takes course from MIT, this course from, Macquarie University, and then we'll hire the best teachers we can find, who can then work with the students who will be lower cost than the researchers and the faculty, but will be great teachers to work with students and emphasize the practical skills. And you know what? The students won't pay a thing to go. It'll be free for them because we'll get businesses to pay their way in exchange for the students working with them. So IBM or Intel will provide the resources for a student to attend. In exchange, the student will go work for IBM or Intel. So the student gets a job and a free education. A new model. Not all of these will succeed, perhaps, but interesting approaches for how to take advantage of the technology, the globalization, and the important demographic changes. So let me wrap up. So I want to get to some questions and see who wants to challenge me or ask me hard questions. I think we have a huge opportunity here that a lot of the old line universities in this country, as well as in my country, are not necessarily dealing with quickly enough. How do we reach additional populations, bring more people in, reduce the cost of education, improve the quality and the return on investment? How do we broaden what we are teaching so that we are really teaching the problem-solving skills and how to think and the skills of humanity and understanding to work in a diverse world? And increasing global knowledge because students are going to need it. How do we experiment more rapidly with new approaches to teaching and stay innovative and adaptive, use technology more effectively, use data and measurement, better use the network of relationships? These, I think, this is the opportunity, and there are a lot of challenges too. We tend to be, each of our institutions, very decentralized, so someone in my role or the president's office can't tell individual departments how to do things. And I'm sure that's true in Indian institutions too. The humanities department wants to do what the humanities department does. So how does a decentralized institution start making these changes? There's also a lot of inertia. Many of our institutions are comfortable and are used to doing things the same way for decades or centuries. How do we get them to evolve? We also don't have good data on what actually works for education. So we believe at Chicago we have a phenomenal approach to teach people how to think. How do you measure how well you taught someone how to think? So I think we need some new efforts to measurement technology so we can actually learn how well we're learning. Regulatory restrictions, and that's a meaningful term in this particular country, of course, because there's been talk about opening up the higher education system to both external providers, which is not what Chicago is seeking, but others I think would love to come into India to actually offer degree programs, but also to allow new forms of degree and non-degree education systems. Status and elite reputation. It's hard to innovate when you're so worried about your ranking or where you stand on some arbitrary notion of reputation. And it's hard to scale up these sort of intimate relationships that we create in Chicago and try and teach people how to learn. So I started this with the notion of a phoenix and what comes when we're reborn. So no one's dying, there's no major flame now, but I think there are some embers burning around the world. And I think that we as educators or as educated people have a responsibility to think how the benefits of education can extend more broadly for a more peaceful and prosperous world. So with that, let me shut up and engage some questions. Thank you.